Hello, everyone, and welcome to Make It Mindful Insights for Global Learning, the podcast for globally minded educators seeking thoughtful conversations about how education can adapt to an ever changing world. I'm Seth Fleischauer, former classroom teacher turned founder of an international learning company specializing in the teaching of global learning. Together, we explore the interconnectedness of people, cultures, and systems, and how these relationships shape transformative ideas in education. Each episode features educational changemakers whose insights lead to practical solutions and lasting impact. And today's guest is Mike Davis. Mike, welcome and thank you for being here.
No, thank you, Seth, for having me. This is an honor and a pleasure. I'm a fan, and I'm really happy to be here. So thank you. Yeah.
Awesome. This episode is brought to you, as always, by Banyan Global Learning, the company that I founded and that teaches some digital citizenship as part of global learning. That is why you are here today. When we spoke earlier, you talked to me a bit about Merrick Security Solutions, which is the company that you initially founded, but then you also have Bytes.io, and that is what we're going to talk about here today. My understanding is that you integrate mindfulness into cybersecurity. I just love those two words combined into a single phrase,
Oh my
and you
goodness.
do that for young learners, and that aligns with the global learning tenet of digital literacy. When we talk about digital literacy within global learning, we're talking about using technology to connect with people worldwide. We're talking about accessing international resources, participating in global learning communities, developing critical digital citizenship skills. These are some of the things that I would love to touch on today as we talk about mindfulbots.io. But first, if you could please just kind of give us the story of how you ended up here. Is
Okay.
cybersecurity company, but now you're dabbling in education. How'd you get here?
Oh my goodness, such a great question. First of all, I will say my career in technology started in the Navy. I was in the Navy for 22 years. Started really out of curiosity. The title that I was called in the Navy was called Radio Man. And 18 years old, it sounded really sexy and really, I don't know, it just kind of enticed me to say yes. So I said yes to the Navy, and I thought I would just do maybe maybe a tour here, a tour there. But that decision led me down an incredible journey, incredible career of more than 2 decades in cybersecurity. So I found a part of me that was really driven around policy, really driven around black and whiteness, and really strict, robust kind of defense posture around cybersecurity in the Navy. So when I retired, I thought, well, let me do something a little bit low key. So I ended up getting a corporate job at Boeing, which, as you'd imagine, is probably a similar degree of robustness. And my journey led me down to New Mexico, which ultimately led me to this company. And what I want to say is that journey to New Mexico was the real heart opening space for me to get into a different framework around technology. I was
Hmm.
never thinking about technology and mindfulness and breathing and all the things that we do now as a firm before all this journey and this new kind of establishment with my company, Merrick. Merrick started with a question, very much the way mindfulbytes.io started with a question. Merrick started with, who am I in the tech? And that was me looking at all those years in technology and asking myself, who am I in this space that is all the numbers and the ones and the zeros? And I didn't find myself there, to be honest. It was a great career, and I had a lot of great resume material, but I didn't feel me in that space. So I began to dig a little deeper and ask deeper questions. So mindfulbytes.io was the same type of mindset. During COVID, everyone resisted the idea that we could connect. And that's true. We were dealing with a lot of things in that time. This company was slower than it ever has been. And so I started thinking around, what can I do um, that's that's that allows me to become more tuned into the work, but also give a better impact to the world. And so 2022 or so, I gave a TED talk in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And you can see this on the video, but I can't unsee it, unfortunately. But the reminder is, when I was in this talk, I was halfway through the talk and I realized I was speaking to the wrong audience. And this talk was called Cyber Happiness, Mindfulness as a Service. So it's a really a culmination of everything I've done. And But I looked in the audience in this sort of dark void of people smiling and admiring me up on stage. I realized I was speaking to the wrong audience. So I left the stage and realized I needed to speak to kids. I needed to get to the
Not in the
next.
middle of the speech, though. You finished the speech?
I finished the speech. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, but there was a real moment where I was like, should I finish the speech? But I realized in mid
It'd be pretty funny. You're like, you know what? Actually, this isn't for you. I'm sorry. My bad.
exactly. So that was the thing that really opened up. And I realized I didn't know the space in between me and the thing I was talking about. I didn't know. I had curated a speech, I had done the prep and all this stuff, but I didn't know the space in between me and that thing that was called mindfulness in tech. So I reinvented that language and created mindfulbytes.io, which asks the same question: what is the space in between you and the device? And we're asking elementary school kids this question, 6 to 10-year-olds. So the origin story is really, it's really, you know, um, it's inside of me and it's outside of me at the same time. But this journey is a moral obligation for I've done in tech for almost 30 years to keep asking questions, to stay more curious. And that curiosity, particularly when it comes to our social media, our mental health, our digital agency, it's kind of up for grabs a little bit in this space of technology and the innovative side of technology. We love it, but we also have to really regulate ourselves around it. So this curriculum was pitched to a couple of schools in New Mexico, and luckily and fortunately, we're now in a pilot program with a couple of schools in New Mexico here, and we're just collecting data and building more. Conversations around the topics, and here we are. We're having a conversation about it on this podcast. So ultimately, it's a grow. It's evolving. We're aspiring to be more involved with different types of schools. Right now, we are in the charter school system. We're in the public schools. Um, the private school system, and we're also in a Montessori school system. So we're slowly integrating into a classroom. But right now, we're just a pilot. But it's really asking a different kind of question to kids who are just slowly being introduced to technology at that age bracket.
Wow. Okay. So a lot here. First, I want to say thank you for your service. Thank you for your 22 years. I also love that now I know that radio man is a euphemism for cybersecurity guy. So if I meet another radio man, I will know. Be careful. And so you mentioned this. What is the space between you and the device? It's a bit of an abstract question. I imagine you have a more concrete answer for that. What do you mean? What is the space between you and the device?
No, it's a great question, Seth. Honestly, what we mean by that question is really it's really built around the framework of consciousness, and I don't want to get too deep and metaphysical in this conversation.
Oh, you can. You're in the right place for that.
How many hours do we have on this podcast? I don't know. But for the sake of just being clear, I want to say that young kids at that age, probably 6 to 10, and we want to kind of be honest around the space. They're closer to that space of consciousness and imagination and creativity than most of my friends, at least in our 40s. We've sort of lost the sense of that feeling. So what we ask kids today, in that question specifically, we ask kids, what is that feeling, that the anxiety, the excitement, the thing that wants one more hour? What is that? The thing that wants to feel, sad or terrified to go online in a certain chat room or a certain game. What is that? So we're not asking kids to really redefine anything other than just identifying what is in front of them when it comes to technology and the devices that they're using. A lot of these devices go, and these emotions, they kind of get packed in. Because one, there's shame, there's embarrassment, there's weirdness. Cyberbullying was always a problem in technology. We're just now seeing the emotional harm and all the results from it in this new age of technology and innovation. So kids that actually are getting devices from parents and schools, they're just jumping right in. And so we're just asking them, before you jump right in, before you get excited to get on that iPad for the first time, what are you feeling? So we're not having trick questions. We're not trying to make it more than what it is. But we know that this question is not being asked by parents. We know it's not being asked by teachers in the education system. And so we want kids to psychologically see themselves uh, regulated, at least understand who they are in the tech in that moment. So it is a little abstract, especially for a young 6-year-old who's just getting whatever device handed to them. But we try to make it fun. We create games. We have this game called Who is Scrolling, and that's part of that. Is like, who is scrolling? If you're going to scroll for 6 hours, is that you scrolling or is that your anxiety scrolling? What does your anxiety look like? We go through all these type of scenarios, and what does it feel like? And we ask students and kids in this case to identify the thing that's in between. And sometimes it is a little weird because they're like, "What do you mean, Mr. Mike?" Ideally, what we want the kids to do is just be unafraid and have less shame around their feelings. So they can be courageous online, and they can be courageous when they use devices. We just want kids to have courage when they feel awkward and be able to announce that they feel awkward without feeling shame.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing is something that we've talked about a lot at Banyan Global Learning, which is the idea that when it comes to digital citizenship, which is one way to talk about what we're talking about here,
Right.
um, if you can simply take a beat and recognize why you are making the choice that you're making, you've crossed the chasm, right?
Absolutely.
Like, right,
Exactly.
because these devices, these software have been designed to make it so that you don't do that.
That's
Right,
exactly
that you don't take that moment, because
right.
as soon as you take that moment, you think, who is scrolling, right? Is that me, or is that my anxiety? Once you start having those conversations, you are no longer the eyeballs that they need for their ad revenue,
That's it.
right? So, it is an essential component of digital citizenship. The most essential component of digital citizenship is to be mindful about it. It's the name of the podcast, Make It Mindful, right?
Right.
Um, I'm wondering, you can talk about it.
Yeah.
You can preach
Mm-hmm.
about how that is a thing you should do. I teach that is a thing that you should do, yet I still sometimes am not the one scrolling on my own phone.
Yeah.
How do you, within mindfulbots.io, just maybe as an educator, I don't know if you're a parent or not, but how do you cross that divide between let's talk about doing this and let's really inspire a practice of doing this?
Oh, such a powerful question. Honestly, so I'm not a parent. I will be very clear. I'm not even a teacher. I'm a consultant, and I work with teachers. I'm actually a better uncle than a parent. I think I'm in the uncle role. There's a lot more
Everyone
sugar
needs a good
involved.
uncle.
I mean, everyone needs a good uncle. Lots of frappuccinos and candy in my job. So that being said, no, I will say that the thing that we are trying to do is sort of destigmatize the idea that you're going into a dangerous place, which actually it kind of is a dangerous place if you don't know what you're doing, what you don't know who you are or how you feel in those spaces. Think about when we go to the grocery store. Most of us have an awareness because we're adults and we've been through this sort of journey before. You always have to have a little snack or a little sugar or something to get your mind right so you can go to the grocery store and buy nutritional food, because otherwise you're going to end up in the middle section where all the sweets and the candies, because
Mhm.
no matter how good intentions you have, if you didn't regulate yourself before you go into a thing, that's going to cause you to make poor choices. And part of that poor choice society is that the algorithm invites that poor choice, those poor choices within all these apps. So I think most kids and most humans who start to use devices for the first time may not know that, and that's the thing that we're trying to unpack with kids is that, yeah, this is shiny and it's fun and your friends are on the other end, but they don't see themselves as technology. The human body is technology. They only see the device. So I think what we're trying to do is make it less of a scary, scary world of cybersecurity and make more of a world you can understand. I mean, and I think that's kind of what we have to do is try to reaffirm that, yeah, it is scary out there. The world is scary out there, but if you follow the rules, if you have some understanding of your body, and it's no different than taking just a drink of water when you're stressed, or when someone says to you, when anyone comes to you, or if you go to anyone and you're like hyperventilating or you're just having a rough time, the first thing someone's going to tell you is, hey man, just breathe. So we're just asking kids to do the same exact thing at their age appropriate level. And with these devices and the excitement and the adrenaline and their little brains are just kind of, we have to just have them understand that it's hard to do that. I too struggle at 48 years old. I too struggle with this idea of being online and who's scrolling, as you mentioned earlier. But we have to put boundaries, and those boundaries come at a cost. It comes at the cost of our time. And I think anyone who's ever quit drinking or quit smoking or done anything that's been a habit that they found to be bad for them, when they come on the opposite side of that, they realize, oh my gosh, I taste food now. I don't have to go out and socialize and drink and be a cool person anymore. I think that's the reality. So it's not going to be just take a class and all of a sudden mindfulbytes.io is the number one curriculum in the world because every kid's now just self-regulated. We want kids to just have an awareness of the awareness who they are. So when you're in that thing, just have an awareness of it. Don't make it seem like it's a bad guy or the boogeyman. Just have an awareness of it. Because when you have an awareness of something, you can put a boundary around it. And part of it is just having an awareness of yourself. And at that age, at this age bracket, and we pick this age bracket for a very specific reason. But ideally, at this age bracket, I think there's a real space that they can find themselves and be courageous around the choices that don't always involve getting seduced entirely by a device or an app. So it's challenging stuff, but it's doable, and we're seeing the results in the curriculum.
Now, I want to talk about those results. I think it's interesting though that you mentioned like quitting drinking, quitting smoking. There is an addictive element here, especially for people who've been exposed to it or been given unfettered access. For example, all adults over the age of 27 who've just had them for the last 10 years have just had, we've been part of this like grand social experiment. I personally am someone who quit drinking and something that and it was exactly like that. It was exactly like you said, right? Is that like all of a sudden, all of these things occurred to me that alcohol had been dulling for me previously. But I was the only person who was going to make that decision for myself. And as I observe some of my friends or family who also drink, or I perceive they might be struggling with a drinking addiction, there isn't a lot that you can say to someone that can pull them out of that. They don't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it for years. I didn't want to hear it. And I think that there's a similar shame, right? That you brought up that word of like, I recognize that it's my anxiety scrolling, but I don't want to have to admit that to someone. I don't want to have to admit that to myself. Right. And so like, I think a necessary recipe, a necessary part of the recipe of what you're talking about here is just the self-confidence to be able to confront some of these uncomfortable ideas, the awareness of not just that these things might be happening, but when they are actually happening within you. So there's this entire kind of world of social and emotional skills outside of what you are teaching them. And then you're adding this additional piece of awareness. One of the questions before we get to the results, you said that it was like the equivalent of like drinking a glass of water or taking a breath, and that you have that looks different at different age levels. I was wondering if you could unpack that for us a little bit. Like, what does this look like for a 6-year-old versus a 12-year-old versus 18-year-old?
Absolutely. And I want to preface by saying part of the work that I'm doing is not just within Mindful Bytes and Merrick Security Solutions. I'm also a PhD student in cybersecurity. So part of my research is focused entirely in this space because I recognize we're struggling beyond the mental health game. It really is a human consciousness kind of decision space that we're having to negotiate every day around our use. So,
oh man, do we have 2 more hours to talk? My gosh.
I warned you. But ideally, I think the thing that you're asked is a great question, because think about what a 6-year-old sees in the world. Everything typically is a little bigger in their world. Everything seems to be much more of a look up approach. And everything around them is sort of this massive kind of learning agent space. Like the classroom is a learning agent. Being in the back of the car with mom and watching traffic. So there's a lot more consumption that's being adhered to. It's like the typical sponge of a kid's brain. Now, as you get older, as we know, some of that begins to slow down, maybe begins to mature differently. Puberty begins to intersect in some of that. But at the end of the day, that this age bracket, kids are just sponges, and they know more than we think they know. I think that's the kind of texture around what I'm learning in class. In 30 years of technology, I've learned more. And I want to be very clear, this is an honest statement. I've learned more in this curriculum with these 6 to 10 year olds than I have in my entire career around human consciousness and tech, because they ask different questions and they're not fettered by life and paying bills and all the things that we have to navigate as adults.
Like what kind of questions do they ask?
It's funny because I almost find it funny, because I'll back it up. We start by saying, like, whenever you feel sad or feel angry or feel upset, what do you do to help yourself when you're online? Say you're on a video game. One 9-year-old girl told me that she looks at a wall for 5 minutes, takes off her headphones from the video game and looks at the wall for 5 minutes and just stares at it. I thought, wow, when I was 9, I was playing in the mud. Like, I was literally playing with rocks. And so I think that's the thing that I found. And another kid who has a YouTube channel, his parents have endorsed that. And he's 9. And, he, of course, every question I would ask in class around technology or things, that his hand would go up, his hands go up. And so, but we talked about the comment section, because that's actually really where he was focusing, because he's in this space of receiving comments from the world. And he said, Mr. Mike, whenever I receive a bad comment, I just look at it as it's not my energy. And I'm like, wow, how do you know that, little 9-year-old? But at the end of the day, that was the thing that I did not anticipate hearing that from. I didn't anticipate, one, a 9-year-old having a YouTube channel, but I also didn't anticipate that answer around, that's not my energy, Mr. Mike. That's not mine. That's the person who's out there. I'm still going to produce good content.
Yeah, you got to hire that kid, have him work for you, teach the stuff.
Right. I'm like, can we talk to you? Can we talk offline with this kid?
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that was the moment where I was like, oh wow, these kids are actually they're actually they're in the space of it already. So it wasn't me teaching them anything. I mean, I facilitated all those things, but it wasn't me. Like, it was a co-facilitation of anything in that moment. So it felt really authentic and it felt really natural. And they saw me as a co-facilitator in that conversation, even though I'm the adult lecturing, so to speak.
Yeah.
But
and
no,
so it sounds.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, so it sounds like what you're doing is essentially giving them, like, providing these questions. You're giving them the opportunity to express their own answers and lead each other in terms of what it looks like for any given kid their age to practice these mindfulness skills when it comes to the digital space. Would you say that's about right?
100%. The biggest takeaway from our first session has been that we are technology as humans. So when you're talking to somebody, you are in a social media experience. When you're texting somebody, just you and your friend, about classroom homework, whatever, that's a social media experience. So we allow kids to see each other in class, role play these same exact scenarios that may happen online, but they get to see the person's eyes. They get to see the person's response. If we do a fictitious post on social media, because a lot of these kids are not on social media, but they have the idea, they know it enough to be dangerous, but they know. So we do fictitious posts on happiness and gratitude and empathy. And I know it sounds a little woo-woo, but we don't want them to post fictitious posts around things and objects, and so we want to give them an idea that they can impact someone's feelings across the room. And so it is a reality.
Less Kim Kardashian, more Adam Grant is what I'm hearing.
There we go. See, I was gonna, you said it, I was thinking it, but yes, exactly. Because ultimately, we want kids to see themselves as humans first, and that they are impacting someone else's life, and they're showing up, that they're passing that shame along through a tweet or through whatever. That's not good, and then we feel like they should know what that feels like. So we do cyberbullying. We role play those scenarios in class, and
Hmm.
sometimes it gets a little gnarly and the enthusiasm to hurt someone else, so to speak. But it is something we have to practice. I'd rather them practice in class and with the safety of their teacher and me and all the things, versus being in real time online. Their first Twitter war, so to speak, uh,
Yeah.
one day.
And
So
that brings up a question for me, which is kind of the role of a school in this, right? Because there is this blurry line, right? Like you might be cyberbullied by a kid who's in your class, but it happened after hours.
correct.
And the question is, what is the responsibility of a school when it comes to teaching these types of skills? And
Right.
it feels like it goes in kind of, well, we'll call it one of three directions,
Mhm.
right? There are the schools that are basically like, that's off campus, that's not us, right?
Yep.
And then there are the schools that are in this fuzzy area in between where, like, I think they feel a certain responsibility that, like, these are the types of skills that are going to be essential to prepare students for the future,
Right.
but they don't know where to start, or they don't have the resources, or maybe they bring in some free stuff that they find online and do it here and there sprinkled in, but it's not really necessarily a part of their culture. And then you have the rare outliers who are like, this is a main goal of what we're doing,
Right.
and we want to make sure that we're nailing this part because it's critically important. um,
Absolutely.
who do you work with, and how do you find the people who are open to doing something more deep than what they're already doing with digital citizenship?
Absolutely. As I mentioned before, we're working with three different sort of sections of education spaces. One is the charter school, private, second is private school, and the other is Montessori. And I can tell you there are three different philosophies that we have to navigate through. And as you alluded to, some of those institutions, there's just a perfect puzzle piece to our curriculum into their programming. So there's not much there's not much work we have to do essentially to change up. For example, the Montessori system is very easy. They're already technology less in classroom. They don't have a lot of digital influence there, and our curriculum is technology less. There's no devices that we're throwing at kids in this curriculum. So ultimately, um, it is sort of a find the best fit and see where their agency is within the school. The responsibility of school is actually very important. I mean, we see it as if not more important than the curriculum, because we're just there to kind of offset some of the decisions that happen when a kid gets a Chromebook from school. Now what? When a kid has a device or several devices and they bring into classroom, now what? Because the last thing we want to do is overburden the teacher, clearly, with all the things that they have to do. But we also recognize that this is an important topic. So it's probably more towards the second point you made. We are one of those resources that schools or technology companies like mine are one of those resources that they should invest in to kind of really figure out how to navigate uh, co-creating with technology. The thing we used to ask kids when they were younger, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? They would be firefighter, carpenter, all these things. But now we ask that question, and we know half of those
Mr.
jobs that the
Beast.
kids are
I want to
asking.
be Mr. Beast.
Mr. Beast, that guy. I don't know, I'm Mr. Beast fan. But those jobs that kids want to do or wanted to do back in the day, they won't even exist 20 years from now because AI and all the things. So we're having to ask different questions now. And with AI in the schools, just to bring up that topic, kids are having to negotiate whether to use or not to use, or how do I use authentically. And so we have to figure out how to co-create. So schools need to learn how to figure out. These schools need to have an intelligent way and a mindful way to integrate both the technology and the student, but also not forget that there's the human in all of that component, and that equation needs to come first before the
Yeah.
technology. So I think if ultimately what we're doing is trying to figure out, and what we have shown to do, and is allow kids to not be so afraid of it that they can't be themselves in the space of it. It's really about being authentic, and I think that's the hardest thing to do when you're online or using a device, because we all know what that feels like from a man of a certain age to do that in real life. But now you're behind the screen, and there's sort of this keyboard warrior effect that happens, that we lose all the sense of who I am because I want to be perceived a certain way because I have 5 filters on me. And those filters are, I mean, it's a metaphor, but it really does apply to the larger grand scheme, grand kind of image of who we present, how we present ourselves online. And what we're doing in this curriculum is just sort of destigmatizing some of that language and really bringing it down where the goats can get it, to where kids can understand it and where it makes sense to them and make it fun too. But at the same time, we want kids to have a better relationship, and the schools have an equal amount of responsibility there too. So
Yeah. So I'm hearing that at least at this stage, there's a bit of a high touch relationship that you have with the schools that you're working with. You're trying to figure out like how your curriculum fits into different styles of learning. I
that's true.
imagine that through this process, you're going to learn enough to be able to be like, okay, you're this kind of school. Here
Yep.
you go, do this. You're also facilitating at this point, but I assume that you can't do
Sure.
everything, right? So at some point, you're going to be like, providing either synchronous or asynchronous training for
That's
teachers
correct.
to do this on their own. Um, and at that point, like what are the results that you're seeing, right? Like assuming that you've got this whole thing built up and this is a curriculum that districts can buy and they can give it to their teachers and they can allot them some time to perform this curriculum with 6 to 10 year olds. What are the results that you're seeking? What are the results that you're seeing already with these schools that you're working with?
No, that's a great question. One of the things that we're seeing so far is that there's less of a gap between what kids are learning online and what parents are informed of. For example, most of the parents during our first segment, this curriculum has only been around for a couple of years, but our first year, most parents from our feedback survey said that probably about 85% of the parents said we need this class too because we don't really know what our kids are learning in that space, and we also have struggled with our own technology addiction at home. So it's really a matter of how do we become better examples, but also learn what our sons and daughters are learning as well. Um, what we saw from that first sort of push was that 87% of most of the parents and kids were now discussing what was happening on their
Hmm.
devices, which wasn't happening before. I think that's the thing that we wanted to see in the beginning, was that there was an open floor plan of like, let's talk about what you're feeling, how was school today. Sometimes it really comes down to asking a better question as opposed to how was school today. But this program is really trying to open up a better conversation between parents and kids, so it's less of a shame space we talked about earlier. No different than birds and the bees and that kind of awkward conversation back then. It's awkward now and it's awkward back then as well. But we found better ways to have those kind of conversations where it's not so terrifying. And also, about 90% of the kids just love the exercises because they get to role play and they get to role play screen time within half the class becomes parents, half the class becomes students, or so there's like a real fun journey around that. We talk about social media reward system and how that those like buttons and comments and followerships add or detract value from your life, and it doesn't um, come at a cost of just throwing the laptop out the window. It just means that they have to understand what they understand. So I think part of the cornerstone of the curriculum is to just ask kids different questions, deeper questions that they can also ask of themselves. They don't feel like they're not privy to or privileged to. Part of the conversations we've had with young folks, particularly our older 9 to 10 year olds, is that they already know enough to be dangerous. They know like dating apps, they know all these things. They know all the kind of language to use online. Um, and I think part of it is just recognizing that we can shift your consciousness a little bit to be less afraid to be yourself, and that is difficult. And you know how it is to be online and present a certain kind of way. I'm online right now with this podcast presenting a certain kind of way, and I hope that my true authentic self comes through. But that is always sort of a conscious choice I have to make as an adult. But when you're young, you're just thrown into the space of all of it at the same time. So you have to choose. So I think we're giving kids a better choice mechanism to ask better questions of themselves. Instead of saying, how are you? In this example, we ask the question, how is your heart? And that's a different response. 99% of the time, I get a different response when I ask anybody that question versus how are you? And so it's no different in that regard in this kind of language technology relationship space. So.
Hmm. Well, now I'm curious, Mike. How's your heart?
My heart, Seth, is full. It's content. it's laughing all the time, actually. So it's just this comedian down there. So we're just hanging out. So
I feel that from you.
thank you.
Well, Mike, thanks so much for being here. Where can our listeners find more information about your work?
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn. My only social media that I really promote on is LinkedIn. But I do have a website, mindfulbytes.io. And anyone who wants to reach me professionally can go to Merrick.io as well for anything like that. But find me on LinkedIn, friend me up, or whatever that case may be. And if you're a school that wants to integrate this curriculum into your program, let me know. We can talk about that. But right now we're a free pilot, so come find us. And
Ooh,
I know
you heard it
exactly.
here.
Everyone loves the word free. But ideally, we are working. I'm on LinkedIn mostly, so thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for being here. Thank you to our listeners for your support. If you'd like to support the podcast even more, please do give a recommendation to a friend, follow us, leave a rating or a review. Thank you, as always, to my advisor, Deirdre Marlowe, and to our editor, Lucas Salazar. And remember that if you want to bring positive change to education, you must first make it mindful. See you next time.